Hello everybody and welcome to the 10th video in our series of videos on political developments in Ireland in the 20th century. So in our last video we looked at the 1916 Rising and the reaction to it. Today we're going to see how this rising that was massively unpopular when it happened ended up being the catalyst for the War of Independence that broke out in 1919. As always, we begin with our learning outcomes. So by the end of this presentation, you guys should know what internment and conscription are. You guys should point to three things that led to the rise in popularity of the Sinn Féin party. And finally, you guys should know three of Sinn Féin's policies after the successful election in 1918. We talked last week about how the execution of the rebel leaders and how that had turned the people of Ireland against the British. People were initially upset because they thought that the rising would affect Ireland getting home rule. But with the execution of the 15 leaders and a further 75 being sentenced to life, including Owen MacNeill and Eamon de Valera, sympathy for the rebels grew. On top of that, a further 2,000 were arrested and imprisoned in jails without trial. So this is called internment, and imprisonment without trial is known as internment. Rebels such as Michael Collins and Cathal Brugha were imprisoned in Frongoch prison in Wales, while men who had absolutely nothing to do with the rising, like Arthur Griffith, were also interned. Funnily enough, the rising didn't become known as the IRB Rising or the Volunteer Rising or the Irish Citizen Army Rising. It became known as the Sinn Féin Rising. Even though there were rebels who were in the Easter Rising that were members of the Sinn Féin party, they were a small amount. However, as the public opinion turned due to the executions and internment of the rebels, Sinn Féin became more popular. At the end of 1916, however, all these interned prisoners were released due to the public backlash. And in 1917, there were a series of by-elections. So a by-election is a special election that takes place when an elected politician dies or has to stand down. And there were 4 of these incidents in Ireland in 1917. Sinn Féin won 4 elections in a row, showing the rise in their popularity. They defeated the once untouchable Home Rule Party. Sinn Féin began running candidates who were imprisoned, and they really got the sympathy vote. As a show of good faith to the United States, who had just joined the British side in World War I, the new Prime Minister, David Lloyd George, who we'll be talking about later on, agreed to release those 75 prisoners that he had sentenced to life imprisonment in June of 1917. So now all the rebels were back out and free to go back to Ireland. This included Eamon de Valera. He is an American-born nationalist who was the only senior commander of the 1916 Rising who wasn't executed. Some believe this was due to his American nationality. Arthur Griffith, who was the leader of Sinn Féin, he stepped aside to allow de Valera then to become the leader of the party of Sinn Féin. Meanwhile, Michael Collins and Cathal Brugha, who had been interned in Frongoch, began rebuilding the IRB in the background. And this was when Collins also began to build up his spy network or his contacts in the heart of the British administration in Dublin, in Dublin Castle. 2 big events occurred that further swung support behind Sinn Féin. So we had their association with the Rising, and now the conscription crisis of 1918 furthers their popularity. In 1918, Britain passed a law that would bring in conscription. So conscription is compulsory military service. This is obviously the opposite of voluntary military service. If you are called upon by the British government, you have to go and serve. Both Sinn Féin and the Home Rule Party opposed this law. However, administrators in Dublin Castle alleged the leaders of Sinn Féin were plotting with the Germans to stage another rising. There was no evidence for this, and Sinn Féin didn't have the men or the women to do this. But the British government arrested the leaders of Sinn Féin, people such as Arthur Griffith, Eamon de Valera, Countess Markievicz, another successful rebel who had fought in 1916, while Collins and Brugha went on the run to escape arrest. This was seen by everybody for what it was. It was an excuse to arrest those opposed to conscription. However, no Home Rule politicians were arrested and Sinn Féin's popularity grew even stronger. By now, the party was as big as the Home Rule party, and when a general election was called at the end of World War I, Sinn Féin wiped out the Home Rule party. The election took place in December 1918 and Sinn Féin won 73 seats while the Home Rule party won only 6. Remember, Home Rule in the 1912 election had won 73 seats themselves. Sinn Féin now demanded a republic. Our dual monarchy would no longer suffice. The political goals had changed. They kept Griffith's policy of abstention, so they believed that they should not participate in Westminster and wanted to set up their own government in Dublin. They also decided that they would meld the two ideologies of the IRB and original Sinn Féin, and they would be willing to use both parliamentary methods and physical force to achieve their goal of an independent Ireland that was a republic. That brings us to the end of our presentation, so you guys should now know what internment, imprisonment without trial was, and conscription, compulsory military service. You guys should be able to point out 3 things that led to the rise in popularity of Sinn Féin: the association with the 1916 Rising, the conscription crisis of 1918, and the German plot. You should also know 3 of Sinn Féin's policies after the election of 1918, so you should know they wanted a republic, you should know they believed in abstention, and you should also know that they were willing to use both parliamentary and physical means to achieve their goals. That's the end of the video. Hope you guys got something useful from this.